Hello, people. This is Duncan at Free as an Eagle. I just wanted to say hi and check in. It's spring and snow is gone up here in Alpenwald where the A-frame is. So I've actually been doing a little bit of work on this now that the snow's gone and the weather's mostly improving. This is a kind of a rainy weekend, but I had a little bit of time this morning on Saturday. I just had to drop the dogs off at the groomer and then had time to make a run over to the gym, and then I said, hey, I'm going to run up and do a quick video before I cover up the stairs. That's one of the more exciting things that I've done on this. Very brain taxing. So I figured I'd say hi and give you a little rundown on how I built these stairs and the problems I ran into. And I'll swing over so you can see them actually. An exciting and fun project. Difficult though, actually quite challenging, but I got it done by the help of AI and a lot of the old high school math that I'd pretty much forgotten. I hadn't had to use it that much. One thing that's funny, as a carpenter, you really do actually end up using some of the old things like the Pythagorean theorem and sines and cosines and other interesting mathematical things. And I actually employed AI to help me. ChatGPT, I asked it to help me with some math, and I actually had to train it to recognize what I was talking about, and then in the end it did the math, and it used the laws of cosines and sines and angles and nifty stuff. So anyway, I'll give you a little bit of a rundown on these stairs. So an A-frame definitely presents some interesting challenges. A normal staircase isn't too hard to build once you get the basic gist of how to do it. The different factors that come in are, like you can see, there's a top floor here, and I actually have the finished flooring on that. And one of the things I ran into that was a bit problematic was you have a given drop, and this has 8-foot ceilings in it, and then you're adding to that to go up to the floor, and then when you put the finished floor on, that has to be factored in. So because I already had it done, it made that a tiny bit easier, because you have to factor in the finished floor on the top as well as the finished floor on the bottom. And right now you can see there's a plywood subfloor, which will be built up about 3/4 of an inch with finished flooring. So you have to factor that in when you're doing the math. And then the rise and the run are simply the net distance out with your treads. And you can see these treads, they're actually 2x12s, which are about 11 1/4 inches wide. And that gives you a run, but because of the overhang of 1.5 inches, it nets out at a 10-inch, roughly, run on these. So in other words, if you measure down from, say, the face of this tread, okay, I got my hand in there so you can see. So this is the face of this tread, but you've got about 1.5 inches in there. So the net distance from here to where this is about 10 inches. So that's your run. And then the rise is your distance between, try to get my hand back in the game here. Okay, so your rise is the distance from the surface of this tread to the surface of this tread. And the trick with stairs is you want that to be the same, be very consistent so your steps don't get messed up. So in other words, the distance from that subfloor, that plywood subfloor, to the top of this platform needs to end up being the same rise as the stairs. So I've made that deliberately 3/4 of an inch higher so that when the finished floor is there, it'll net out at the right height. And of course, a landing looks like it complicates the stair building process, but it isn't too bad because it simply essentially ends up being another stair. You have to think of it as another stair. So if you have a staircase with landings, they have to carry the pattern of rise and run. I mean, obviously the run on the landing is not carried the same way because it's a platform, but among the issues and challenges of this, there's a number. I'll try to walk through them. So this A-frame, originally I designed it as 36 feet from front to back, and I divided it into 12-foot sections. Well, when I got into building the front section here, which is the only part that's cathedral, I wanted the second floor to be generous and have room, and I wanted a balcony up there. And at one point, I decided to make the balcony come out 6 feet. And to make that understandable, you see the front edge of it here. I actually ended up having to cut this back 2 feet because I put down flooring and I had stained the underside of it to make a nice ceiling. And I found a stain that matched the Doug fir that most of the framing on this is quite nicely. So I had this come out 6 feet. And when I did the first attempt at the stair layout, I realized I really didn't have enough room for a comfortable staircase. I didn't want it to be uncomfortably steep. And you can vary the rise and run configuration a little bit. And in carpentry, you have certain little rules you tend to follow. Like a 7.5, a 10.5, or 7.5, 10 is a fairly comfortable rise run ratio. I started out with a 7-11 run out, but the 11-inch run actually took me too close to that wall, and it wouldn't have made a comfortable landing area. And originally I thought of having a landing that would redirect the stairs into the room, but after several attempts, I realized that wasn't going to work. So you do some experimenting. But anyway, what happened was, I had this balcony out 6 feet. Now these are 2 feet on center of these joists. So I began to realize that 4 feet was generous enough for a little balcony. And this is just outside the bedroom upstairs. There'll be a wall over above this, and then you got 2 feet, you got 2 more feet. And I had it coming out this far, but for some reason, all of a sudden, that extra 2 feet made the cathedralized area seem too small and cramped and wouldn't allow for the stairs. So even though I already had, and it's humbling sometimes when you're doing carpentry, you realize you screw up. You don't want that to be permanent. So, and an old buddy of mine used to tell me, Duncan, the only mistakes in the end are the ones you don't fix. And that stuck in my head. I'm like, you're right. I used to be too proud to want to work backward and undo things I had done. And I realized that can get you in a whole lot of trouble, especially when you make dumb mistakes and they haunt you through the whole rest of the job. So that's the cut-off remains of a joist. I just decided, even though I had put the floor on it and everything, I'm like, you know what? The heck with it. It's got to be right. So I snapped the line across that floor from one side to the other, and I took a saw and I just cut the outer section off the balcony, and that gave me the room I needed. And then my first attempt at the layout wasn't quite where I wanted it to go. So then I did a little brainstorming and decided that this little landing would land right under the window and would be generous enough to leave room. And to further configure, or what word do I want? Obfuscate, confuse. There were multiple factors here. So this wall on the A-frame goes up at a 64-degree angle from the bottom. I wanted to maximize the height and the steep pitch to get the most space out of it with what were 28-foot 2x12 dug fir boards. And to maximize the use of them, I just arranged it so that I'd get the longest possible rafters out of them. And I did that. Well, so you have the 64-degree angle going up, and then the staircase, in order to work, it turns out it's exactly 99 inches from the top of this finished floor in the balcony area to the subfloor. And I factored things in, so with a little bit of math, I determined that 7 5/8 inches would divide the run up evenly. So that would be the comfortable height on the stairs in terms of the rise. And the run would net out at 10 inches. I didn't want 11 because it would take me too close to the wall. So, and there's a law, they used to call it the law of 17s, I call it the law of 18s, where you add the rise and the run, and that's basically the stride that your legs are making when you go upstairs. So in order to make stairs comfortable, you really want to have about a 7, 10, 7.5, 10, 7-11, something like this. A 7-11 is kind of a long run out, but it's still comfortable. It adds up to 7 and 11 is 18 inches. For me, that's comfortable. In the old days, I think people were shorter, and the rule of 17s used to be a way to go, but nowadays people are a little taller. And for me, the 18 inches, when you add the rise and run together, is comfortable. So 7 5/8 and 10 is close enough, and it uses up the height. So I won't go into all the detail of that right now because it's something you wouldn't remember probably unless you're a carpenter. Laying out stairs really does take a lot of checking, double checking. And to further complicate this, so here's what I decided to do to make this really pretty. I've got the 64-degree angle going up. When I calculated out the stair angle of the 7 5/8 and 10, that ended up being a 37-degree angle. So then what's interesting is you have a 37-degree angle, the stairs going up to the balcony, and because of that 64, there were a couple of choices. One of which was just come into the balcony square, but then the bottom of the stairs would have been kicked way over if I were going straight up at right angles. It would be an easier thing to build, but I really didn't want it eating up any more space than it had to, because this isn't a huge living room area, and I really didn't want to use up all the space. So a couple of details too is if I walk back here, right now we're full of insulation and building material. But so over on the left side here, what you're seeing, there's going to be a bedroom, and then that's going to come most of the way over here, right to where the balcony, where those stained boards are, right about there, 2 bays back from the staircase. So that's going to be a wall, and that's going to come out into a hallway. So that'll be a bedroom back in there. Under the stairs will be a little bit of open space, probably some bookcase type things. Now over on the other side, if we look, now we're looking toward the north side now, away from the staircase. And when you walk in the door, there'll be a bathroom over where that window and the hand truck and sawhorses are. There'll be a bathroom. And then before we get to this little dormer, the kitchen will begin. And then the kitchen will kick out all the way down here. And my brother Al had a good suggestion. I was going to have a wall and a pass-through, and he says, well, why even have a wall there? Just let the hallway wall end in the kitchen, and then it can be open, the rest of it, into a dining area. I'm like, I'll buy that. That's a good idea. So if you'll ignore all the stuff in the way, the staging and all, we're going to talk about that in a couple of minutes. But so anyway, the idea was leave this open on this side, and that leaves the living room more open because the stairs do eat up space. And I realized at one point there's no other place you can really put them. So in order to compact these stairs, I decided that it would look really pretty and it would work functionally to kick them down at an angle that would allow them to have the headroom needed under that 64-degree pitch on the walls. And that really messed with me. I had a whole brain dead day where I was trying to figure this out. And I finally ended up, there's a little board there you can see. If I hang a plumb bob off of that board and drop it down, it lands on that tread, say the bottom tread there. You need 80 inches of headroom. So obviously it had to be in the place with the least headroom. I needed 80 inches. So I hung a plumb bob, which is a string with a weight on it, over that, and began to realize, okay, I've got to be a certain distance over. And in order to figure out what that distance was, I did the plumb bob 80-inch thing here, then I did it again up on top. I took that board down at some point, but I did the same thing further up on the wall and lined it up so that I had that headroom right. And then I actually used ChatGPT to tell it that I had a 64-degree angle going up and I had a staircase going up at a 37-degree angle and I needed 80 inches of headroom. And what angle would I need to kick those stairs in at? So I used several ways of trying to figure that out on paper and whatever, and I actually got the ChatGPT to tell me it was a 22-degree angle, and I was using sines and cosines and doing math, and finally got several things to agree, and then when I built this, it actually worked, which I was pleased with. And the other thing that was neat is I wanted to cut the stringers and the treads to match this angle, so this took quite a bit of trickery, carpentry-wise, not too hard on some of it, but the stringers right here, this little face, in order for these to sit in against it, had to be cut at the 22-degree angle, and I decided to make the treads at the 22-degree angle, make the whole thing look really pretty. So I built the platform. I actually put some polyurethane on that. These are old boards, but they were nicely weathered, and I kind of like the look that I got out of them. And then these ones are a little newer, but you know, they're going to darken up with polyurethane. The only thing was I just built these, and that was newer wood that wasn't dry, so I was advised to let that wood dry before I polyurethaned it. So what I did is I've got a roll of paper, and I'm going to wrap all these stairs with the paper, cover them up, so when we're working upstairs, which is fairly soon to come, we're going to start finishing up the framing, wall framing, insulating, wiring, and stuff upstairs, because that's open. It's not full of stuff. So I thought, well, now we got these stairs here, we can go up there and work on that. So some of the things I had attempted or hoped to do before winter set, I never got to. Stairs, I didn't really plan on getting to till now, but I realize there's a funny thing that happens when you're a carpenter. I don't know why this is a principle, but it is. But it's simply the fact that in most cases, the stairs and the bathroom are the last things you finish. It's almost like you're just going to punish yourself. So you're climbing up and down ladders, you're pulling things up and down with ropes, and then when you're all done, you put in the stairs that you should have had there from the beginning, especially when it comes to ones getting into the building. We built a little platform and some stairs out there because, you know, you do a lot of silly things when you're not really wanting to take the time to do the job in the right order. I hear some geese out there. I wonder if I can see them. There's a heck of a lot of haze, but I've seen some, well, it's a little bit hazy today. Nothing's going to show, but yeah, they're moving on up. I'm hearing those geese coming through. So anyway, I think I've covered this a little bit. So we had to have the headroom, we had to figure out the angle, and then once we had that figured out, then it became buildable. So then laying it out, cutting all the carpentry parts of it were actually the faster, easier part. And then, of course, building it onto this thing, a little tricky, but very pretty. I think it's going to be nice when it's polyurethane, and then that will come up. And then at the top of the stairs, what's going to happen, eventually there'll be railings across, and it'll be prettied up with some dress boards, and then posts and rails and all that. But that's later, and the idea now is we want to be able to work upstairs. So I'm going to cover all these stairs with paper to protect them, and then we'll be able to work upstairs. And then when a lot of that's been done, we'll get to a place where we'll eventually, when these are dry, we'll polyurethane them a few coats and we'll pretty it up. But anyway, yeah, so we got some light coming through, the little skylight. Got through the winter, and there's some other things I want to talk about, but I think I'm going to actually make a separate video. I was going to add to this video a little detail about the wood stove and that whole configuration, but that's a whole nother can of worms that I opened up. Something I'd hoped to have finished before winter set in, and I didn't get to it. I got caught in a position where there was snow, and installing the wood stove, I got as far as buying and transporting it up here, and I ended up having to make a bunch of fancy parts to configure that and make it work, which I now have built. So we'll discuss that on a separate video, just to avoid this one being too long. But anyway, this is the stairs from the behind them. It's kind of a neat little project. So I'm kind of proud of that, to be honest with you. It was difficult. I tearing my hair out trying to figure out how to do it, but I think it came out nicely. So that'll be kind of a feature rather than just a utility type thing. I want to make this thing pretty and rustic. So anyway, that one's I can check off on the main part of it, and we will keep moving forward. But now that it's spring and it's getting warmer, I expect to get a lot more done, and my goal is to have this thing substantially finished by September, which, there's a lot to do, but we are now making progress, so I feel hopeful. Anyway, hope you enjoyed this. If you have any questions, just ask me. I could get into more detail on the mechanics of building these things, but I doubt too many people are going to actually be in a position where they need to know that stuff. And it's hard to remember. So anyway, I'll say goodbye for now, and I will check in with you again soon. Have a good day.